Candle in Alina's hand shook as she stood before the tall wooden door at the end of the dark hallway. Midnight had already passed. The manor around her was silent, except for the faint sound of wind pressing against the windows. Her heart beat so hard she could feel it in her throat. She had never walked this far into the east wing before, and she had never been told to visit any man's private chamber at such an hour. Yet here she was, standing in front of the Duke's room, waiting for the courage to knock. Only an hour earlier, her father, Edmund Whitmore, had called her into his study. His voice had been calm, almost too calm, when he told her that Duke Alaric Thornwood wished to see her that night. He said it was an important matter tied to their family's future, something that could not wait until morning. Alina had asked why a duke would summon her, a merchant's daughter, alone and so late. Her father had simply looked away and told her to trust him. She had always trusted him. He was the only family she had left since her mother passed 3 years ago. So she dressed in her mother's old blue gown, the finest thing she owned, and walked through the sleeping halls toward a meeting she did not understand. Now, standing before the door, she almost turned back. Something about the silence of the corridor felt wrong. The portraits on the walls seemed to watch her. Even the flame of her candle flickered as though warning her to stop. But she thought of her father's tired eyes, the debts he never spoke of but she always noticed in the way he counted coins late at night, and she raised her hand and knocked. The door opened faster than she expected. A man stood there tall, with dark hair slightly messy as if he had been running his hands through it for hours. He wore a plain white shirt, not the formal clothes she imagined a duke would wear. His eyes were sharp, tired, and confused all at once. He looked at her as though she were the last person in the world he expected to find at his door. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice low but firm. Alina's breath caught. She had expected recognition, not confusion. I am Alina Whitmore," she said. "My father, Edmund Whitmore, told me you asked for me. He said we had an agreement, Your Grace." The Duke's expression shifted immediately. The confusion turned into something sharper, something close to alarm. "I made no such request," he said. "I have never met your father. I do not know who you are." The words hit Alina like cold water. For a moment she could not speak. She simply stood there, candle trembling in her hand, staring at a man who was supposed to have summoned her but clearly had not. Her mind raced through the events of the evening, searching for an explanation, but none came. Her father had looked her in the eyes and told her this was true. He would not lie to her. He could not. "There must be some mistake," she said quietly, though even as she spoke the words, doubt was creeping into her chest like a slow poison. "My father said it was arranged. He said you requested my presence tonight." The Duke studied her face for a long moment. Whatever suspicion he first held seemed to fade as he saw the honest confusion in her eyes. She was not acting. She truly believed what she was saying. "Come inside," he said finally. "Standing in this hallway is not safe for either of us. If someone finds you here at this hour, the story that spreads will not be kind to you, whether it is true or not." Alina hesitated. Every rule she had ever been taught told her not to enter a strange man's room at night, especially not a man of such high position. But something in his voice was different from what she expected. There was no hunger in it, no command. There was only concern, and perhaps a flicker of anger that had nothing to do with her. She stepped inside. The room was larger than anything she had seen in her own home, though simpler than she imagined a duke's chamber would be. A single lamp burned on a desk covered in papers. A fireplace crackled low, throwing shifting light across the walls. The Duke closed the door gently behind her, careful not to make a sound. "Sit if you wish," he said, gesturing to a chair near the fire. "You look as though you might fall over." Alina did not sit. She stood near the door, candle still in her hand, watching him carefully. "Your Grace, please, I need to understand. My father told me this meeting was planned. He said it involved our family's future. If you did not ask for me, then who did? Why would he lie about something like this?" The Duke walked slowly toward his desk, running a hand over his tired face. "I do not know your father," he repeated, "but that does not mean no one used my name to deceive him. There are people in this house, and beyond it, who benefit from confusion, from secrets, from arrangements made in shadows rather than daylight. Alina felt her stomach twist. Are you saying someone tricked my father into sending me here? I am saying it is possible, the Duke answered carefully. And if that is true, then both of us have been placed in danger tonight, not just you. The fire popped softly in the silence that followed. Alina's mind spun with questions she could not yet answer. Why would anyone want her here in the Duke's room at midnight under a false claim? What could anyone gain from such a lie? And why had her father, a man she trusted completely, been the one to deliver her into it? She thought back to the moment in his study, the way he could not quite meet her eyes when he explained the summons, the way his hands trembled slightly as he spoke, the way he mentioned money almost carelessly, as though testing whether she would notice. She had noticed. She simply had not wanted to believe what it might mean. There is more you are not telling me, she said suddenly, looking directly at the Duke. Your face changed the moment I mentioned an agreement. You know something. The Duke was quiet for a long moment, as though deciding how much to reveal to a stranger he had just met under the strangest of circumstances. Finally, he sighed and gestured again toward the chair. Sit, he said. This is not a short story, and you deserve to hear all of it before the sun rises and turns tonight into nothing more than rumor. Alina finally lowered herself into the chair, setting her candle on the small table beside it. Her hands were still shaking, though now it was less from fear and more from the weight of everything that suddenly felt uncertain. The father she trusted, the man who raised her alone after her mother's death, had sent her into a stranger's room under a lie. Whether he knew it was a lie or believed it himself, she did not yet know. But either way, something dangerous was moving in the shadows of this house, and she had just walked directly into its path. The Duke sat across from her, his sharp eyes studying her face as though trying to decide how much truth she could bear to hear. Outside, the wind pressed harder against the windows, and somewhere far down the hallway, a door creaked, so faint it might have been imagined. But Alina heard it, and so did the Duke. Their eyes met for a brief second, both aware that whatever was happening tonight, it was far from finished. There are people in my family, the Duke began slowly, who would gain a great deal if my reputation were destroyed. If a young woman were found in my chambers at midnight, with no proper explanation, the story would spread through every noble house before breakfast. My name would be ruined. And a ruined name, he added, his voice growing colder, can be forced into decisions a man would never make with a clear mind and a clean reputation. Alina's breath caught. You think someone arranged this to hurt you, not me. I think, the Duke said carefully, that whoever convinced your father to send you here tonight was not thinking of you at all. You were simply the easiest tool to use. The word tool struck something deep in Alina's chest, a mixture of anger and humiliation she had not expected to feel so strongly. She had walked here believing she was helping her family, trusting her father completely, only to learn she might have been nothing more than a piece moved across a board by hands she could not even see. Then I need to know the truth, she said, her voice steadier now despite the storm inside her. All of it, starting with who would want to hurt you badly enough to use my father as a weapon. The Duke leaned back slightly, the firelight catching the sharp lines of his face. For the first time since she had entered the room, something like respect flickered in his tired eyes. You are not what I expected, he admitted quietly. Most people in your position would have run the moment I told them the truth. You are asking questions instead. Running will not fix a lie, Alina said. And I intend to find out exactly how deep this one goes, even if it means staying here until dawn to hear every word of it. The Duke almost smiled, though the expression did not fully reach his eyes, weighed down as they were by whatever burden he had been carrying long before Alina ever knocked on his door. He rose from his chair, walked to the window, and looked out at the dark grounds below, where a single lantern moved slowly along the garden path, carried by someone who should not have been awake at this hour either. Then listen carefully, he said, because once I tell you what I suspect, there will be no simple way back to the life you had this morning. Alina did not flinch. She sat straighter in her chair, hands finally steady, candle flickering beside her, and waited for the truth her father had kept from her, the truth that had brought her to this room this night, this moment that would change everything that came after it. The Duke turned from the window and walked back toward the fire, his shadow stretching long across the wooden floor. He picked up a folded paper from his desk and held it for a moment before speaking again, as though weighing whether Alina was truly ready to hear what came next. "My father died 2 years ago," he said. "Since then, the title and the estate passed to me, though not without resistance. I have a cousin, Lord Cassius Thornwood, who believed the inheritance should have gone to him instead. He was older than me by 6 years, closer to my father in age and temperament, and for most of his life he assumed the estate would eventually be his. When the will named me instead, he did not accept it quietly." Alina listened carefully, her earlier fear slowly transforming into focused attention. "You think your cousin is behind tonight?" "I believe it is possible," the Duke said. "Cassius has spent the last 2 years trying to find any way to weaken my position. He has spread rumors, delayed contracts, and turned distant relatives against me one conversation at a time. But nothing he has done so far has been enough to remove me from my title. A scandal, however, involving a young woman in my private chambers at midnight, would be more than enough to convince the family council that I am unfit to hold this position responsibly." "But why my father?" Alina asked. "We are not nobles, we are not even wealthy. My father is a merchant struggling with debts he barely speaks about. What use could we possibly be to a man like your cousin?" The Duke's eyes sharpened at the mention of debts. "That," he said slowly, "may be exactly the answer we need. A man drowning in debt is far easier to manipulate than a man with nothing to lose or everything to protect. If your father owes money to someone connected to Cassius, that debt could have been used as leverage. A promise to erase what he owes, in exchange for one simple task, would be tempting to any man trying to protect his family from ruin." Alina's stomach turned. She thought of the moneylender her father had mentioned in passing months ago, a man named Silas Grimwood, whose name always made her father's shoulders tense whenever it came up in conversation. She had never met the man herself, but she remembered the fear in her father's voice the one time he spoke of him directly, warning her never to answer the door if a stranger came asking about unpaid accounts. "There is a man," she said slowly. "Silas Grimwood. My father owes him money. I do not know how much, but I know it frightens him. He never speaks of it directly, but I have seen the way his hands shake when certain letters arrive at our door." The Duke's jaw tightened. "I know that name," he said. "Grimwood has done business with my cousin before, quiet business, the kind that does not appear in official records. If your father owes him a debt large enough to threaten your family's home, and Cassius offered to have that debt forgiven in exchange for tonight's arrangement, then everything begins to make sense." Alina felt sick. Her father, a man who had always taught her the importance of honesty, had allowed himself to be pulled into a scheme that used his own daughter as payment for a debt he could not otherwise escape. She wanted to believe he had not fully understood what he was doing, that he had been told some smaller, gentler version of the plan, one that did not involve real danger to her. But even that thought did not fully ease the ache spreading through her chest. "I need to speak with him," she said, rising from her chair. "Tonight, if I can, I need to hear the truth from his own mouth." "It is nearly 2 in the morning," the Duke said gently. "Walking back through the halls now alone is not wise. If someone is watching this room, waiting for the right moment to spread word of a scandal, leaving now could be just as dangerous as staying." Alina paused, torn between the urge to run home and demand answers, and the quiet logic of the Duke's warning. She thought of the lantern she had seen earlier, moving slowly through the garden, carried by someone who had no obvious reason to be awake. Someone could indeed be watching, waiting for exactly this kind of mistake. "Then what do you suggest?" she asked. "Wait until the household begins to wake naturally," the Duke said. "Servants rise before dawn to begin their duties. If you leave with them, blending into the normal movement of the house, no one will think twice about a young woman walking through the halls in the early morning light. It is not perfect, but it is safer than slipping through empty corridors in the middle of the night. Elena nodded slowly, though her mind was already racing ahead to the conversation she would have with her father once she returned home. She sat back down, though the chair no longer felt as comfortable as it had before. Every part of her wanted to run, to shout, to demand the truth immediately. But she forced herself to remain still, to think clearly, the way her mother had once taught her to do during difficult moments. "Tell me more about your cousin," she said. "If I am going to help uncover this, I need to understand exactly what kind of man we are dealing with." The Duke studied her for a long moment, clearly surprised by her choice of words. "Help uncover this. You do not need to involve yourself further, Elena. You have already been placed in enough danger tonight." "I am already involved," she said firmly. "My father is caught in the middle of whatever your cousin is planning. If I walk away now and pretend I know nothing, the danger does not disappear. It simply grows in the dark where I cannot see it. I would rather face it directly." Something shifted in the Duke's expression, a quiet respect settling into the tired lines of his face. He sat down across from her once more, folding his hands together as he considered how much more to share. "Cassius is clever," he said finally. "He does not act directly. He uses others, people desperate enough to do his bidding without fully understanding the larger plan. Grimwood is likely one of those people, a man who profits from debt and fear, useful to anyone willing to pay for his particular skills. If we want to expose Cassius, we cannot simply accuse him. We need proof, something that connects him directly to tonight's events, something that cannot be denied or explained away." "Then we find that proof," Elena said. "Starting with my father. If he was given a promise about his debt, there may be a letter, a written agreement, something Grimwood used to convince him this arrangement was safe." The Duke nodded slowly. "It is a place to begin, but we must move carefully. If Cassius learns we are investigating him before we have real evidence, he will destroy anything that could connect him to this, and he may turn his attention towards silencing anyone who threatens to expose him." Elena felt a chill at the word silencing, but she did not let it shake her resolve. She had already lost her mother to illness, watched her father slowly crumble under financial pressure he refused to fully explain, and nearly walked blindly into a scandal that could have ruined her reputation forever. She was done being someone things simply happened to. If there was a way to fight back to protect her father and expose the truth, she intended to find it. "Then we move carefully," she agreed, "but we move." Outside, the first faint hint of gray light began to touch the edges of the sky, though true dawn was still hours away. The fire in the room had burned lower, its warmth softer now, and the tension between them had shifted into something else, something closer to an uneasy partnership formed in the strangest of circumstances. Neither of them had expected this night to unfold this way. Elena had come expecting an explanation for a summons that never truly existed, and instead she had found a conspiracy far larger and more dangerous than a single lie told by her own father. As the minutes passed in careful, quiet conversation, Elena began to understand the shape of the danger surrounding her. It was not simply about a false invitation or a misunderstanding between families. It was about power, about a man willing to use debt and fear to control the people around him, and about a cousin determined to take back a title he believed was rightfully his, no matter who he had to sacrifice along the way. Her father had been one of those sacrifices, whether he understood it fully or not, and Elena herself had nearly become another. But sitting there in the quiet room, watching the first light of morning creep slowly across the horizon, Elena made a silent decision. She would not simply accept whatever explanation her father offered when she confronted him. She would not allow herself to be used again by people who saw her only as a tool to achieve their own ambitions. Whatever truth waited to be uncovered, she intended to find it herself, piece by piece, no matter how dangerous the search became. The Duke rose from his chair as the sound of distant footsteps echoed faintly through the halls, servants beginning their early morning duties exactly as he had predicted. He walked to the door and opened it slightly, checking the corridor before turning back to Elena. "It is time," he said quietly. Walk with purpose, as though you have every reason to be here. No one will question a young woman moving through the halls at this hour if she does not give them a reason to look twice. Elena stood, smoothing the wrinkles from her mother's old blue gown, and picked up her candle, though its flame had burned low throughout the long night. She paused at the door, looking back at the Duke one final time before stepping into the hallway. "Thank you," she said, "for telling me the truth, even when it would have been easier to send me away with no explanation at all." "You deserve the truth," the Duke replied simply. "Whatever happens next, remember that you are not facing this alone anymore." Elena nodded once, holding on to those words as she stepped out into the quiet corridor, ready to walk back into a life that had changed completely in the span of a single night, carrying with her a truth that would soon force her to confront the father she had always trusted, and the lie that had brought her, unknowingly, into the middle of a dangerous game she never asked to play. The walk home felt longer than it had ever felt before, though the distance itself had not changed. Elena moved through the waking streets with her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders, her mind replaying every word the Duke had spoken. By the time she reached her front door, the sky had turned a pale gold, and smoke was already rising from the chimney, meaning her father was awake. She found him in the kitchen, sitting at the small wooden table, staring into a cup of tea that had likely gone cold an hour ago. He looked up when she entered, and for a brief moment, relief flooded his tired face. Then he saw her expression, and the relief faded into something closer to fear. "Elena," he said, standing quickly, "you are safe. I was worried when you did not return before sunrise." "Were you?" she asked, her voice quiet but sharp enough to make him flinch. "Or were you simply waiting to see whether your arrangement had worked?" Her father's face paled. "What do you mean?" "What happened last night?" "The Duke never asked for me," Elena said, watching her father closely as the words landed. "He had never even heard of us before I knocked on his door last night. There was no agreement, father. There was never any meeting planned. Someone lied to you, and you sent me into that room believing it was true." Edmund Whitmore sat back down heavily, his hands trembling around the cold cup of tea. For a long moment he said nothing, and the silence stretched between them like a wound slowly opening. Elena waited, refusing to fill the quiet with anything that might make this easier for him. She needed to hear the truth from his own mouth, exactly as she had promised herself she would. "I did not know," he finally said, his voice breaking. "I swear to you, Elena, I believed it was real. A man came to me 3 days ago, someone connected to Sela's Grimwood, and told me the Duke wished to discuss a business matter involving our family. He said if I sent you to deliver a message on his behalf, a sign of good faith between our families, my debt to Grimwood would be forgiven entirely." "And you believed a stranger's promise was worth risking my safety?" Elena asked, her voice rising despite her effort to remain calm. "I believed I had no other choice," her father said, tears now visible in his eyes. "Elena, you do not know how deep this debt runs. If I cannot pay what I owe by the end of this month, we will lose this house. We will lose everything your mother and I built together." "I was desperate, and desperate men make terrible decisions. I am ashamed of what I did, but I promise you, I never intended to put you in real danger. I believed it was simply a message to deliver, nothing more." Elena studied her father's face, searching for any sign of deception, but she found only exhaustion and genuine regret. Whatever mistake he had made, it seemed clear he had not fully understood the danger he was placing her in. He had been manipulated, just as the Duke suspected, by people who understood exactly how to use his fear and desperation against him. "Tell me everything about this debt," she said, sitting down across from him. "All of it from the beginning. I cannot help fix this if I do not understand how deep it truly goes." Her father hesitated, clearly ashamed to reveal the full extent of his financial troubles to his own daughter. But something in Elena's steady gaze convinced him that hiding the truth any longer would only cause more harm than good. Slowly, painfully, he began to explain. 2 years ago, shortly after her mother's passing, his trading business had suffered a series of losses. A shipment of goods had been lost at sea. An important business partner had withdrawn his investment unexpectedly, and within months, Edmund found himself unable to cover his usual expenses. Rather than admit his struggles to Alina, who was still grieving her mother at the time, he had borrowed money from Silas Grimwood, believing he could repay the debt quickly once his business recovered. But the business never fully recovered. Interest on the debt grew faster than he could manage, and Grimwood, patient at first, had recently begun demanding repayment with increasing urgency. 3 days ago, when the stranger arrived offering to erase the entire debt in exchange for one simple favor, Edmund had seen it as a miracle, a way out of a crisis that had been slowly crushing him for 2 years. "I should have questioned it more carefully," he admitted, his voice thick with shame. "I should have asked why the Duke would want such a strange arrangement, why it needed to happen so quickly, so secretly. But I was desperate. Alina and desperate men see only the solution in front of them, not the danger hiding behind it." Alina reached across the table and took her father's trembling hand, her anger softening slightly into something closer to sorrow. She understood now that he had not betrayed her out of cruelty or carelessness, but out of fear, the kind of fear that convinced good people to make terrible choices. That understanding did not erase the danger she had faced, but it helped her see the situation more clearly. "We need to find proof of who arranged this," she said. "The Duke believes his cousin, Lord Cassius Thornwood, is behind the scheme, using Grimwood to manipulate desperate people like you into helping him destroy the Duke's reputation. If we can find written proof connecting Cassius to Grimwood, we may be able to stop this before it causes any more damage." Her father's eyes widened. "You want to investigate the very people who nearly destroyed our family? Alina, that is far too dangerous. These are powerful men, men who have already shown they are willing to manipulate and deceive to get what they want." "They already involved us," Alina said firmly. "Whether we investigate or not, we are already tangled in their plan. I would rather understand the danger fully than wait blindly for the next lie to arrive at our door." Her father studied her for a long moment, seeing perhaps for the first time how much she had grown since her mother's passing, how the frightened girl he once protected had become a young woman capable of facing danger directly rather than running from it. Slowly, he nodded. "Then we do this together," he said. "I owe you that much at the very least." Over the next several hours, father and daughter worked together, searching through the papers Edmund had kept regarding his debt to Grimwood. Most of it was ordinary, simple records of loans and interest payments, nothing that clearly connected to Lord Cassius. But near the bottom of a small wooden box, hidden beneath older documents, Alina found a single folded letter that made her breath catch. It was written in careful, formal handwriting, addressed to her father, though it bore no signature. The letter promised that his debt would be entirely forgiven if he ensured his daughter delivered a private message to the Duke's chambers at exactly midnight, and stated clearly that the arrangement had been approved by, quote, "a member of the Thornwood family with authority over such matters." "This is it," Alina said, her hands trembling slightly as she held the letter. "This is proof that someone within the Thornwood family arranged this deception. It does not name Cassius directly, but combined with what the Duke already suspects, this could be exactly the evidence we need." Her father stared at the letter, his expression a mixture of relief and lingering guilt. "I kept it," he admitted quietly. "I do not know why. Perhaps some part of me feared exactly this outcome and wanted proof in case things went wrong." Alina folded the letter carefully and tucked it into the pocket of her dress. "I need to bring this to the Duke as soon as possible," she said. "He needs to see it, and we need to plan our next move carefully. If Cassius learns we have this letter before we can use it properly, he may find a way to make it disappear, along with anyone who tries to expose him." Her father's face tightened with worry, but he did not argue. Instead, he reached out and gently squeezed her hand. "Be careful, Alina. I have already made one terrible mistake that nearly cost you everything. I could not bear to lose you to a mistake of my own making twice." "I will be careful," she promised, though even as she said the words, she understood the danger ahead was far from finished. A single letter was a start, but it was not enough to fully expose a man as careful and powerful as Cassius Thornwood. There would be more obstacles ahead, more lies to untangle, and possibly more danger than either of them yet understood. As the afternoon light began to fade into evening, Alina prepared to return to the Thornwood estate, the folded letter safely hidden within her dress. Whatever waited for her there, she intended to face it with the same steady resolve that had carried her through the confusion and fear of the previous night. The truth had already cost her father's peace of mind and nearly her own safety. She was determined to see it fully uncovered, no matter what it demanded of her next. By the time Alina reached the Thornwood estate, the sky had turned a deep orange, the sun sinking low behind the hills. She was led once again through the quiet halls, this time by a servant who seemed to expect her arrival, which told her the Duke had likely given instructions for her to be brought to him without delay. He was waiting in a small study near the east wing, different from his private chambers, a room filled with books and old maps rather than personal belongings. He rose the moment she entered, his eyes searching her face for news. "You found something," he said, reading her expression before she even spoke. Alina reached into her dress and carefully withdrew the folded letter, placing it gently on the desk between them. The Duke unfolded it slowly, his eyes moving quickly across the careful handwriting. His jaw tightened as he read, and by the time he finished, his hands had curled into fists at his sides. "This confirms it," he said quietly. "Someone within my own family arranged this deception, promising to erase your father's debt in exchange for placing you in my chambers under false pretenses. Though it does not name Cassius directly, the timing and method match exactly the kind of careful manipulation he prefers." "It is not enough on its own, is it?" Alina asked, watching his expression carefully. "No," the Duke admitted. "A letter without a signature can be denied. Cassius is clever enough to claim he knows nothing about it, that someone else entirely arranged this in his name to damage his reputation instead of mine. We need something that connects him directly, something he cannot easily explain away." Alina thought for a long moment, considering their next move carefully. "Grimwood," she said finally. "He is the one who approached my father directly. If we can find proof of his connection to Cassius, financial records, letters, anything that shows the two of them working together, that combined with this letter could be enough to expose the truth completely." The Duke nodded slowly, clearly impressed by her reasoning. "Grimwood keeps an office near the Eastern Market, though he rarely conducts his more questionable business there directly. Still, it may be a place to begin if we can find a way to look through his records without drawing suspicion." "Then let us find that way," Alina said firmly. Over the following days, Alina and the Duke worked carefully together, meeting in quiet corners of the city under the guise of ordinary errands, careful never to be seen together long enough to draw unwanted attention. The Duke arranged for a trusted friend, a former soldier named Nathaniel Hale who had served under his father years ago, to help investigate Grimwood's business dealings without revealing the true purpose of their inquiry. Nathaniel proved resourceful, using his old military connections to gather information quietly, speaking with clerks and merchants who had dealt with Grimwood over the years. Slowly, a clearer picture began to form. Grimwood had indeed conducted several private transactions, with a man matching Cassius Thornwood's description. Transactions that involved unusually large sums of money moving quietly between them, always just before some new rumor or scandal began circulating about the Duke. "This has happened before," Nathaniel reported one evening, meeting Alina and the Duke in a quiet corner of a nearly empty tavern far from the estate. 3 months ago, a rumor spread claiming the Duke had mistreated a tenant on his land, driving the man into poverty through unfair rent increases. It was entirely false, but it damaged his reputation among the local farmers for weeks. Around the same time, records show a payment from Grimwood to a man who later admitted quietly to spreading that very rumor. Alina felt a chill at how carefully and repeatedly this scheme had been executed. "This is not a single mistake or a moment of desperation," she said. "This is a pattern, carefully planned and repeated whenever Cassius needs to weaken the Duke's position. Which means, the Duke added grimly, he will not stop simply because one attempt failed. If we do not expose him now, he will try again, using someone else's desperation the next time, perhaps with even greater consequences. The weight of that realization settled heavily over the small group. Alina thought of her father, still carrying guilt over his role in the scheme, and of how easily another desperate family could be pulled into Cassius's manipulation if he was not stopped completely. We need more than rumors and financial records, Alina said. We need him to admit his involvement directly, or find proof so undeniable that even his allies cannot defend him. Nathaniel exchanged a glance with the Duke before speaking again. There may be a way, he said slowly. Grimwood is not a loyal man. He serves whoever pays him the most, and he has grown increasingly nervous since news spread that the Duke's chambers were nearly compromised without the scandal actually occurring. If someone approached him now, offering more than Cassius has promised, in exchange for the full truth, he might be willing to talk. That is incredibly risky, the Duke said. If Grimwood suspects even for a moment that we are trying to trap him, he could warn Cassius immediately, giving him time to cover his tracks completely. Then we need someone Grimwood does not suspect, Alina said quietly, an idea forming in her mind even as she spoke it aloud. Someone he already trusts, at least somewhat, someone connected to a debt he still believes is unresolved. The Duke's eyes widened as he realized what she meant. Alina, no, your father cannot approach that man again. It is far too dangerous. My father is the only person Grimwood has already dealt with directly in this exact scheme, Alina argued. If my father returns to him, claiming confusion over why the arrangement failed, expressing fear that his debt remains unpaid, Grimwood may reveal more than he intends, simply to reassure my father that the plan can still be completed properly. The Duke shook his head firmly. It is too risky. If Grimwood grows suspicious even slightly, your father could face real danger, not simply financial threats. My father already faced real danger the moment he signed that first loan, Alina said, her voice steady despite the fear tightening in her chest. He wants to make this right, Your Grace. Let him help fix what his desperation allowed to happen. The Duke studied her for a long moment, clearly torn between the practical value of her plan and his genuine concern for her family's safety. Finally, he sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. If we do this, he said, we do it carefully, with Nathaniel positioned nearby at all times, ready to intervene the moment anything feels wrong. I will not risk your father's safety carelessly, not after everything his family has already endured because of my cousin's ambitions. Alina nodded, grateful for his caution even as anxiety twisted through her at the thought of her father walking directly back into danger. But she also understood that sometimes the only way to end a threat completely was to face it directly, rather than waiting fearfully for it to strike again on its own terms. That evening, Alina returned home and explained the plan carefully to her father. He listened in silence, his expression growing more determined with every word she spoke. When she finished, he did not hesitate. I will do it, he said firmly. I owe you this, Alina, and I owe it to myself to finally stand against the man who used my fear to nearly destroy everything I love. 2 days later, carrying a mixture of fear and quiet determination, Edmund Whitmore walked once again towards Silas Grimwood's office near the Eastern Market, unaware of exactly how dangerous the truth he was about to uncover would prove to be. Silas Grimwood's office sat at the end of a narrow street near the Eastern Market, a plain building with no sign to announce its purpose, exactly the kind of place designed to be forgotten by anyone who did not already know its true business. Edmund stood outside for a long moment, steadying his breathing before finally pushing open the door. Inside, the office was dim, lit only by a single lamp on a large wooden desk. Grimwood sat behind it, a thin man with sharp features and cold gray eyes that studied Edmund carefully the moment he entered. Whitmore, Grimwood said, setting down his pen slowly. I did not expect to see you again so soon. I assume you are here about your debt." "I am here," Edmund said, forcing his voice to remain steady, "because I do not understand what happened. I did everything that was asked of me. My daughter went to the Duke's chambers exactly at midnight, exactly as instructed. Yet nothing has changed. My debt still stands, and I have heard no word about the arrangement being honored." Grimwood's expression flickered, a brief moment of surprise quickly hidden behind practiced calm. "The arrangement did not proceed as planned," he said carefully. "There were complications." "What complications?" Edmund pressed, letting genuine frustration color his voice, frustration that was not entirely difficult to summon given everything his family had already endured. "You promised me my debt would be erased. I trusted that promise enough to risk my daughter's reputation and safety. I deserve an explanation." Grimwood studied him for a long moment, clearly weighing how much to reveal. Finally, he leaned back in his chair, folding his thin hands together. "The plan required your daughter to be discovered in the Duke's chambers, creating a scandal that would weaken his position among the family council. Unfortunately, it seems the Duke was warned in advance, or perhaps simply grew suspicious on his own. The scandal never occurred as intended." Edmund felt a chill despite already suspecting much of this from Alina's account. Hearing it confirmed directly from Grimwood's mouth made the danger feel suddenly, terribly real. "Who arranged this plan?" he asked. "I deserve to know exactly who I have been working for, and who still holds power over my family's debt." Grimwood hesitated, clearly uncomfortable revealing names directly. "That is not information I share freely," he said carefully. "Then perhaps," Edmund said, forcing steadiness into his voice despite the fear tightening his chest, "I should speak with the Duke myself, and explain exactly how my daughter came to be standing outside his chambers at midnight, and exactly who arranged for her to be there." The threat, carefully calculated between Alina, the Duke, and Nathaniel beforehand, landed exactly as intended. Grimwood's calm expression cracked slightly, real alarm flashing behind his cold eyes. "That would be a serious mistake," he said quickly. Lord Cassius Thornwood would not take kindly to his name being spoken so carelessly, especially not to the very man he sought to weaken. There it was, the name spoken aloud, directly from Grimwood's own mouth, exactly the confirmation they needed. Edmund kept his expression carefully controlled, though relief and fear mixed together inside him. "Then Lord Cassius owes me an explanation as well," Edmund said. "If his plan failed, my debt should still be forgiven, given the risk my daughter and I already took on his behalf." Grimwood's jaw tightened. The arrangement was conditional on the scandal actually occurring. "Since it did not, your debt remains unpaid, and I would advise you to gather the funds owed as quickly as possible, before I am forced to take stronger measures to recover what you owe." Edmund forced himself to remain calm despite the threat clearly hidden within Grimwood's words. "I understand," he said quietly, turning to leave before his fear became too visible. Outside, hidden carefully in the shadow of a nearby building, Nathaniel watched Edmund emerge from the office, his expression tense but his posture steady. They walked separately for several streets before finally meeting at a predetermined location, where Alina and the Duke waited anxiously. "He said the name," Edmund reported immediately, still slightly breathless from the tension of the conversation. "Cassius Thornwood." Grimwood confirmed directly that Cassius arranged the entire plan, hoping the scandal would weaken the Duke's standing with the family council. The Duke's expression darkened with a mixture of anger and grim satisfaction. "It is not written proof," he said, "but combined with the letter we already possess, and Nathaniel's records of the financial transactions between Grimwood and Cassius, it builds a picture too consistent to easily deny." "Is it enough to bring before the family council?" Alina asked. The Duke considered carefully before answering. "It may be enough to raise serious questions," he said, "but Cassius is clever. He will likely claim Grimwood is lying to protect himself, or that the letter was forged by someone trying to damage his reputation. We need something more direct, something that connects him personally and undeniably to tonight's scheme." Nathaniel spoke up thoughtfully. What if we could record Grimwood admitting this directly, in his own words, in a setting where his admission cannot later be denied or explained away as rumor? The Duke's eyes narrowed with interest. You mean bring witnesses, respected witnesses, to hear his confession directly? Precisely, Nathaniel said. If Grimwood believes he is simply reassuring a frightened debtor, as he did today, he may speak just as openly in a similar situation, unaware that others are listening carefully from a hidden position. Alina felt a spark of hope, beginning to grow amid the tension of the past several days. My father could return once more, she said, this time with trusted witnesses positioned to hear everything clearly. If Grimwood repeats what he confirmed today, in front of people whose word carries weight before the family council, Cassius will find it far more difficult to deny his involvement. The Duke turned to Edmund, his expression serious. This would ask even more of you, he said. Are you willing to face Grimwood again, knowing the danger involved? Edmund straightened his shoulders, and for the first time since this entire ordeal began, Alina saw something in her father's eyes that reminded her strongly of the man he had been before her mother's death, before debt and fear had worn him down so heavily. Determination, steady and unshaken. I allowed fear to nearly destroy everything I love, he said. I will not allow fear to stop me from fixing it now. Plans began forming quickly after that, careful and deliberate, designed to gather undeniable proof of Cassius Thornwood's scheme while protecting Edmund from any real danger during the confrontation. Two respected merchants, longtime associates of the Duke's late father, agreed quietly to serve as hidden witnesses, trusted enough that their testimony would carry significant weight before the family council. Nathaniel arranged the details carefully, ensuring every possible risk had been considered and addressed. Yet even as the plan took careful shape, a quiet unease settled over Alina that she could not fully shake. Cassius had already proven himself patient, careful, and willing to use other people's desperation as weapons against those he wished to destroy. A man capable of such calculated cruelty, once he sensed his plans were unraveling, would not simply retreat quietly into the shadows. He would fight to protect himself, and Alina feared deeply what such a fight might ultimately require from all of them before the truth was finally, completely exposed. 3 days later, everything was ready. Edmund returned once more to Grimwood's narrow office near the Eastern Market, this time carrying a folded piece of paper listing a partial payment he claimed to have gathered toward his debt, a believable excuse for another visit. Hidden carefully in the small storage room adjoining Grimwood's office, accessible through a connecting door left slightly open by Nathaniel earlier that morning, the two merchants waited silently, straining to hear every word exchanged. Alina and the Duke waited nearby, in a quiet carriage positioned a short distance down the street, close enough to respond quickly if anything went wrong, far enough to avoid drawing suspicion. The tension inside the carriage felt heavy, both of them silently praying the plan would unfold exactly as intended. Inside the office, Edmund placed the folded paper on Grimwood's desk. This is a partial payment, he said. I have gathered what I could, though I still struggle to understand why my debt was not forgiven, given everything my daughter risked on Lord Cassius's behalf. Grimwood examined the paper briefly before setting it aside, his sharp eyes studying Edmund carefully. Lord Cassius does not concern himself with the details of failed arrangements, he said coldly. He simply expects results, and when results fail to materialize, those who failed him bear the consequences, not him. Even when the failure was not our fault, Edmund pressed, careful to keep genuine frustration in his voice without pushing too hard. We did exactly as instructed. My daughter delivered herself to the Duke's chambers at precisely midnight, exactly as your associate arranged. Yes, Grimwood said impatiently, and the Duke, it seems, had already grown suspicious of unusual arrangements involving his household, likely due to Lord Cassius's own past attempts to weaken his position. This was not the first such plan, nor will it likely be the last, until the Duke's reputation is finally damaged enough to force the family council's hand. There it was again, further confirmation, spoken carelessly by a man who believed himself safely alone with a frightened, cooperative debtor. In the storage room, the two hidden merchants exchanged a silent glance, both committing every word carefully to memory. "How many times has Lord Cassius attempted this?" Edmund asked, pushing his luck slightly further than originally planned, driven by a genuine desire to understand the full scope of the danger his family had been drawn into. Grimwood's expression shifted slightly, suspicion flickering briefly behind his cold eyes. "That is not information that concerns you," he said sharply. "Your only concern should be repaying what you owe before my patience and Lord Cassius's patience runs entirely dry." Sensing he had pushed slightly too far, Edmund quickly softened his tone. "Of course," he said. "I only wish to understand my situation clearly, given everything my family has already sacrificed." Grimwood studied him for a long moment, suspicion slowly fading back into cold, practical calculation. "Gather the remainder of your debt within 2 weeks," he said finally, "or I will be forced to pursue collection through less pleasant means. Whatever happened between Lord Cassius and the Duke no longer concerns your situation directly." Edmund nodded quickly, gathering himself to leave before any further suspicion could take root. As he stepped outside into the afternoon light, his heart pounding heavily in his chest, he felt a strange mixture of fear and quiet triumph. They had what they needed. Grimwood had confirmed, clearly and repeatedly, that Cassius Thornwood had orchestrated multiple attempts to damage the Duke's reputation, using desperate debtors as unwitting tools in his ongoing scheme. The two merchants slipped quietly out through a rear exit shortly after, meeting Nathaniel a few streets away before all of them made their way back toward the waiting carriage. When Edmund climbed inside, Alina immediately reached for his hands, checking carefully for any sign of harm. "It is done," Edmund said, relief evident in his exhausted voice. He confirmed everything, clearly enough that even Cassius will struggle to deny it. The Duke listened carefully as the two merchants recounted every detail of the conversation they had overheard, his expression growing increasingly resolute with each confirmed detail. "This is exactly the kind of undeniable testimony we needed," he said. "Combined with the letter and the financial records Nathaniel has already gathered, we finally have enough to bring this matter directly before the family council." Yet even as relief settled over the group, Alina could not fully shake the unease still lingering in her chest. "Grimwood will likely report this conversation to Cassius soon," she said carefully. "Even if he suspects nothing directly, my father's questions may have raised enough curiosity that Cassius grows cautious, perhaps even desperate, if he senses his plans are unraveling." The Duke nodded gravely. "We cannot afford to wait long," he said. "The family council meets in 5 days for their regular quarterly gathering. If we present our evidence then, before Cassius has time to prepare a defense or destroy any remaining proof, we stand the best chance of exposing him completely." 5 days. It felt like both an eternity and far too little time, given everything that still needed to be carefully prepared. Alina spent the following days helping organize the evidence clearly, ensuring the letter, the financial records, and detailed written accounts from the two merchants who witnessed Grimwood's confession were all properly documented and ready to present. Throughout those tense days, however, a quiet fear continued growing steadily within her. Cassius Thornwood had already proven himself calculating and dangerous, willing to manipulate desperate people without hesitation to achieve his ambitions. A man like that, sensing his carefully built plans beginning to collapse around him, would not simply wait quietly for judgment to arrive. Alina feared deeply what desperate, dangerous actions he might take instead, once he finally realized the truth was closing in around him faster than he had ever anticipated. Her fears, unfortunately, would soon prove entirely justified. 2 days before the family council was set to meet, Alina received an urgent message delivered by a breathless young servant boy who had run nearly the entire distance from the Thornwood estate. The note, written hastily in Nathaniel's familiar handwriting, contained only a few words, but they were enough to send a wave of fear through her entire body. Grimwood's office was set on fire last night. He is missing. Come immediately. Alina rushed to the estate as quickly as she could manage, her mind racing through every possible explanation, none of them reassuring. When she arrived, she found the Duke and Nathaniel already deep in tense conversation within the same small study where they had first reviewed the letter days earlier. "What happened?" she asked immediately, breathless from her hurried journey. The Duke's expression was grim. "Grimwood's office burned completely last night," he said. "Along with it, any remaining financial records that might have further connected him to Cassius. Grimwood himself has not been seen since yesterday evening. Whether he fled on his own, fearing exposure, or whether Cassius silenced him to protect himself, we do not yet know." Alina felt a cold chill spread through her chest. "If Cassius is willing to go this far to protect his secret," she said quietly, "what will he do if he learns we still possess the letter and the merchant's testimony?" "That is precisely what concerns me," the Duke admitted. "If he suspects we hold enough evidence to expose him before the council, he may attempt something even more drastic to stop us before the meeting occurs." Nathaniel stepped forward, his expression serious. "We should consider moving our timeline forward," he suggested. "Rather than waiting the full 2 days, perhaps we request an emergency session with select council members, presenting our evidence immediately before Cassius has further opportunity to react." The Duke considered this carefully before nodding. "It is risky, moving so quickly without full preparation, but waiting carries its own significant dangers now. I will speak with Lord Harwick this evening. He has always respected fairness above family loyalty, and his support could help us gather the other council members quickly enough to prevent further danger." As the Duke made arrangements to meet privately with the influential council member, Alina returned home briefly to check on her father, who had grown increasingly anxious since learning about Grimwood's disappearance. She found him pacing nervously in their small kitchen, relief flooding his tired face the moment she walked through the door. "Thank goodness," he said, pulling her into a tight embrace. "I heard rumors already spreading through the market about a fire near Grimwood's office. I feared the worst." "We are safe," Alina reassured him, though her own voice trembled slightly with lingering fear. "But Cassius is clearly growing desperate. We believe he may try something to stop us before we can present our evidence to the family council." Her father's face tightened with worry. "Then perhaps it is time I speak with the council myself," he said suddenly. "I am the one who received the letter directly, the one who spoke with Grimwood personally. My testimony, given honestly and directly, might carry weight the council cannot easily dismiss." Alina considered this carefully. Her father's willingness to step forward publicly, despite the personal shame involved in admitting his desperate mistake, showed a courage she had not expected, even after everything he had already done to help fix the situation. "It could help," she agreed slowly, "but it also means publicly admitting your involvement, risking your own reputation in the process. My reputation matters far less to me than protecting you, and ensuring a dangerous man like Cassius Thornwood does not continue harming innocent families through fear and manipulation," her father said firmly. "I am ready to face whatever consequences come from telling the full truth." That evening, the Duke successfully arranged an emergency meeting with 3 trusted members of the family council, including Lord Harwick, scheduled for the following morning rather than waiting the full 2 remaining days. Word was sent quietly, though Alina worried constantly that Cassius might somehow learn of the meeting before it occurred, giving him time to prepare defenses or attempt further desperate measures. That fear proved justified sooner than expected. Late that same night, as Alina prepared for bed, a loud knock echoed suddenly against her front door. Her father answered cautiously, and Alina's heart sank the moment she recognized Nathaniel's tense voice speaking urgently from the doorway. "Cassius knows," Nathaniel said, stepping quickly inside once Edmund waved him in. One of his own household staff, loyal to him rather than the Duke, overheard preparations for tomorrow's meeting and warned him immediately. "He knows we intend to present evidence against him." How much time do we have? Alina asked, fear tightening her throat. Not much, Nathaniel admitted grimly. The Duke believes Cassius may attempt something tonight, perhaps targeting the remaining evidence directly, or worse, targeting the witnesses who could testify against him. Alina's blood ran cold as she immediately thought of her father, standing right beside her, now directly at risk given his crucial role as a witness in tomorrow's hearing. We need to protect him, she said immediately. And the merchants who witnessed Grimwood's confession. If Cassius silences them before morning, we lose everything we have worked so hard to gather. Nathaniel nodded firmly. The Duke has already sent trusted men to protect the two merchants discreetly throughout the night. I am here to bring you and your father somewhere safer until morning, somewhere Cassius cannot easily reach. Despite the fear gripping her chest, Alina felt a fierce determination rising steadily within her. They had come too far, sacrificed too much, and endured too many lies and dangers already to allow Cassius Thornwood to silence the truth now, on the very edge of finally exposing him completely. Then let us go, she said firmly, taking her father's trembling hand. We finish what we started, no matter what Cassius attempts tonight to stop us. As they hurried out into the dark night, moving quickly and carefully toward the safety Nathaniel promised, Alina could not shake the powerful feeling that tonight, more than any night before it, would determine whether the truth finally triumphed, or whether Cassius Thornwood's careful, dangerous manipulation would succeed in burying it forever beneath fear and silence. Nathaniel led Alina and her father through quiet back streets toward a small, unremarkable house belonging to a retired soldier who had once served alongside him. A safe place unconnected to either the Whitmore family or the Thornwood estate. The house was simple but sturdy, and its owner, a quiet man named Oliver Marsh, welcomed them without asking unnecessary questions, clearly trusting Nathaniel's judgment completely. Throughout the long night, Alina barely slept, her mind constantly turning over every possible danger Cassius might attempt before morning. Her father sat nearby, equally restless, occasionally reaching over to squeeze her hand reassuringly, though his own fear remained clearly visible in his tired eyes. Near dawn, Nathaniel returned with news that eased some of their fear, though not entirely. The two merchants remained safe throughout the night, he reported. Cassius apparently attempted to send someone to intimidate them into silence, but the Duke's men intervened before any real harm occurred. Both merchants remain willing to testify before the council this morning. Relief flooded through Alina, though tension still coiled tightly in her chest. And Cassius himself, she asked, has he attempted anything else? Nathaniel's expression darkened slightly. He has requested an audience with the council as well, he said, claiming he wishes to defend himself against, quote, baseless accusations spread by desperate people seeking to profit from his family's reputation. He intends to fight this directly then, Edmund said grimly. It seems so, Nathaniel confirmed, which means today's meeting will not simply be a quiet presentation of evidence. It will likely become a direct confrontation, with Cassius present, ready to defend himself and discredit anyone who testifies against him. Alina straightened her shoulders despite the fear still tightening within her. Then we face him directly, she said firmly. We have the truth on our side. That has to count for something. The family council meeting took place later that morning within a grand hall inside the main Thornwood estate, far more formal and intimidating than Alina had anticipated. She sat beside her father near the front of the room, the Duke standing confidently nearby, while several respected council members, including Lord Harwick, settled into their seats around a long wooden table. Moments later, Cassius Thornwood entered the hall, his expression carefully composed, radiating false confidence that did not fully mask the tension visible in his tightly clenched jaw. The meeting began formally, with the Duke presenting the evidence carefully and methodically. He described the events of that fateful midnight, explained the discovery of the unsigned letter found among Edmund's papers, and detailed the financial records Nathaniel had gathered connecting Grimwood's payments directly to transactions matching Cassius's private accounts. Cassius listened with practiced calm, occasionally shaking his head as though genuinely confused by the accusations being presented against him. When the Duke finished, Cassius rose smoothly from his seat, addressing the council directly. "These accusations are deeply troubling," he said, his voice smooth and controlled, "but ultimately based on nothing more than an unsigned letter and second-hand testimony from a moneylender who has now conveniently disappeared. I understand my cousin's desire to protect his reputation, but surely this council requires stronger proof before condemning a member of this family based on such flimsy evidence." Several council members exchanged uncertain glances, clearly troubled by the lack of direct, undeniable proof. Alina felt her heart sink slightly, fearing Cassius's calm confidence might successfully sway the room despite everything they had gathered. But then, exactly as planned, the Duke gestured toward the two merchants waiting quietly near the back of the hall. "Perhaps," the Duke said calmly, "direct testimony from respected witnesses, who personally overheard Grimwood confirm your involvement, will provide the stronger proof this council requires." The two merchants stepped forward, their reputations well known and trusted among the council members present. Carefully, clearly, they recounted exactly what they had overheard during Edmund's second visit to Grimwood's office, repeating word for word the moneylender's careless confirmation of Cassius's repeated schemes against the Duke. Cassius's composed expression finally began to crack slightly as the merchant spoke, though he quickly attempted to regain control. Grimwood was a desperate man facing financial ruin, he argued. Perhaps he invented such claims himself, hoping to escape responsibility for his own failed schemes by placing blame elsewhere. And the fire that conveniently destroyed his remaining records the very night before this meeting was originally scheduled, the Duke asked pointedly. Was that also simply an unfortunate coincidence, unrelated to your involvement? Murmurs spread quickly through the assembled council members, doubt and suspicion clearly growing stronger with each passing moment. Sensing the shifting mood in the room, Edmund finally rose from his seat, his voice trembling slightly, though his resolve remained steady. "I would like to speak directly if the council permits," he said. Lord Harwick nodded, gesturing for him to continue. Edmund spoke honestly and openly, admitting fully his own desperate financial situation, the crushing debt he owed to Grimwood, and the promise made to him that his debt would be forgiven entirely if he arranged for his daughter to deliver herself, unknowingly, into a scandal designed to weaken the Duke's reputation. He spoke of his shame, his fear, and ultimately his determination to correct the terrible mistake his desperation had nearly caused. "I am not proud of the choice I made," he said, his voice growing stronger with each word. "But I stand here today because I refuse to allow fear and manipulation to continue harming other families the way it nearly harmed mine. Whatever judgment this council makes today, I have told you the complete truth without exception." The hall fell into heavy silence following Edmund's honest confession. Even Cassius, still standing rigidly near the head of the table, seemed momentarily unable to find a convincing argument against such raw, unguarded honesty. Finally, Lord Harwick rose slowly from his seat, his expression grave. The evidence presented today, combined with the honesty demonstrated by Mr. Whitmore's testimony, leaves this council deeply concerned regarding Lord Cassius Thornwood's conduct. While we cannot claim absolute, undeniable proof beyond every possible doubt, the pattern of behavior described, along with the timing of Grimwood's disappearance and the destruction of his records, strongly suggests deliberate manipulation intended to damage the Duke's reputation unfairly. Cassius's face paled visibly as Lord Harwick continued speaking. "Given these serious concerns," Harwick said, "this council recommends an immediate and thorough investigation into Lord Cassius Thornwood's financial dealings and personal conduct. Until such investigation concludes, he shall be removed from any official role or influence within family matters, and closely monitored to prevent any further schemes against members of this family or those connected to them." The verdict, while not an immediate, complete condemnation, was still a significant defeat for Cassius, stripping him of the influence and freedom he had relied upon to continue his dangerous manipulations. His carefully composed mask finally crumbled entirely, revealing raw anger and humiliation beneath. "This is absurd," he snapped, glaring furiously around the room. "You would destroy my reputation based on rumors and desperate testimony from people directly benefiting from my downfall." "You destroyed your own reputation," the Duke said calmly, "the moment you decided innocent people's desperation and fear were acceptable tools to achieve your ambitions." Cassius opened his mouth to argue further, but seeing the firm, unified resolve reflected clearly on every council member's face, he finally fell silent, understanding that further argument would only worsen his already damaged position. Without another word, he turned sharply and stormed from the hall, leaving behind a heavy, exhausted silence in his wake. Alina felt tears of relief finally sliding down her cheeks as the tension of the past several days finally began to ease. Beside her, her father exhaled a long, shaky breath, relief and lingering shame mixing openly across his tired face. The Duke approached them both once the council members began quietly dispersing, his expression warm with genuine gratitude. "Thank you," he said sincerely, addressing both Alina and her father. "Without your courage, this truth may never have been fully uncovered." "Thank you," Alina replied, "for trusting me that first night, instead of simply sending me away without explanation." The Duke smiled softly, something gentle and genuine finally breaking through the exhaustion and tension of the past several days. "I suspect," he said quietly, "that our paths were always meant to cross that night, even if neither of us understood why at the time." In the days that followed, life slowly began settling into a calmer, steadier rhythm. Cassius, facing mounting evidence throughout the ongoing investigation, eventually left the region entirely, his influence and reputation thoroughly destroyed among noble circles that had once respected him. Grimwood was later discovered hiding in a distant village, having fled out of genuine fear once he realized how deeply he had become entangled in Cassius's dangerous schemes. Facing his own legal troubles, he cooperated fully with authorities, providing additional evidence that further confirmed Cassius's guilt beyond any remaining doubt. Edmund's debt, initially owed to Grimwood, was formally dissolved once authorities recognized how the original loan had been manipulated as part of Cassius's broader scheme. Freed finally from the crushing weight of his financial troubles, Edmund slowly began rebuilding his trading business, this time with newfound honesty and openness toward his daughter regarding any future struggles he faced. As for Alina and the Duke, what began as a night of confusion, fear, and dangerous deception slowly transformed into something neither of them had expected. Genuine friendship grew steadily between them throughout the following months, built upon mutual respect earned through shared danger and honesty rather than empty titles or social expectations. Alina often visited the estate, no longer summoned by lies or manipulation, but welcomed openly and honestly, exactly as she deserved to be from the very beginning. Nearly a year passed following the collapse of Cassius Thornwood's careful scheme, and much had changed within both the Whitmore household and the Thornwood estate. Edmund's trading business had slowly recovered, strengthened this time by honest partnerships rather than desperate, hidden debts. He often spoke openly now about the mistakes fear had once driven him toward, using his own experience to gently warn other struggling merchants against the dangerous promises of men like Grimwood. Grimwood himself faced formal consequences for his role in the scheme, stripped of his ability to conduct business freely within the region after authorities confirmed his repeated involvement in manipulating desperate debtors for Cassius's benefit. Though his punishment did not erase the fear and damage he had caused, it offered a measure of justice that brought quiet relief to everyone who had suffered because of his schemes. Cassius Thornwood never returned to the estate that had once been his childhood home. Reports occasionally reached the Duke regarding his cousin's diminished circumstances in a distant city, stripped of the wealth and influence he had once relied upon so heavily to manipulate those around him. While the Duke felt no particular satisfaction in his cousin's downfall, he found a quiet, steady peace in knowing that Cassius's dangerous manipulations could no longer threaten innocent families the way they had threatened Alina and her father. The Duke himself grew steadily more confident in his role, no longer troubled by constant fear of hidden schemes working against him from within his own family. The trust he had built with the family council through his honest handling of the entire situation strengthened his position significantly, earning him respect that Cassius's careful manipulations had never truly achieved for himself. As for Alina, the frightened young woman who had once stood trembling before a stranger's door at midnight had transformed into someone far more confident, someone who understood clearly the difference between blind trust and earned trust, between empty promises and honest actions. Her friendship with the Duke deepened steadily throughout the following months, built upon countless honest conversations, shared challenges, and mutual respect that neither title nor wealth could ever fully replace. One quiet evening, nearly a year after that fateful midnight knock, Alina found herself once again walking through the halls of the Thornwood estate, though this time the journey felt entirely different. There was no fear knotting her stomach, no confusion clouding her thoughts, only calm familiarity and quiet anticipation as she made her way toward the same study where she and the Duke had first carefully pieced together the truth hidden behind her father's desperate lie. She found him waiting exactly as she expected, seated near the fireplace, a small smile forming the moment he saw her enter. "You came earlier than I expected," he said warmly. "I wanted to see you," Alina replied simply, settling into the familiar chair across from him. "And to remind you that a year ago tonight I stood outside your door, terrified, holding nothing but a flickering candle and a lie I did not yet understand." The Duke's smile softened into something gentler, more thoughtful. "And now?" he asked quietly. "Now," Alina said, "I understand exactly how much truth matters and how dangerous it can be when powerful people choose lies instead. But I also understand something else, something I did not expect to find that terrifying night." "What is that?" the Duke asked, leaning forward slightly. "That sometimes," Alina said, meeting his eyes steadily, "the worst lie can lead you directly toward the most honest, meaningful truth you could ever hope to find." The Duke reached across the small space between them, gently taking her hand in his own. Outside, the wind pressed softly against the windows, much as it had that very first night, though this time, no fear accompanied its quiet sound, only the comfortable, steady presence of two people who had faced danger and deception together, and emerged stronger, wiser, and closer than either of them could have ever imagined when Alina first knocked on that midnight door. What began as her father's desperate, fearful lie had ultimately revealed something far more valuable than either of them expected that terrifying night. A friendship built on honesty, courage, and the unshakable truth that real trust, once broken, can still be rebuilt, stronger and steadier than before, when both people choose honesty over fear and truth over silence, no matter how difficult that choice may seem in the darkest moments.